Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different, a delightfully dark autopsy on a uniquely pathetic subject. We're going to dissect a creator who quite literally strangled himself with his own severed strings. This is the fascinating, terrifying, and utterly humiliating tale of the Shadow of the Puppet King. It's a Gothic fable detailing exactly how a fragile mind's cowardly quest for absolute control inevitably led to his total, whimpering collapse. So, let's grab our scalpels, shall we?
Now, he craved to be the absolute I. You see, he actually believed that true sovereignty meant existing completely without tension, which is, well, terribly naive. He looked at the strings binding his creations, the very friction that forced his hands to ache and his mind to negotiate, and he just saw shackles. He wanted this state of pure, unadulterated command where literally nothing could ever push back. But as we're going to see, his desperate leap toward a frictionless existence wasn't an ascension. No, it was just the first stumbling step right into his own shallow grave.
Phase 1. The Folly of Absolute Command.
Okay, look at the pathetic philosophical tension here between the Fichtean concept of the absolute I and the not I. The I is the will, the creator, right? But the not I is the external friction that actually gives that power shape and meaning in the first place. Our foolish puppeteer, though, thought resistance was a trap. By severing the cords of his creations to erase that friction, he didn't suddenly become a god. Instead, he just initiated his own cowardly cultural castration. He severed the very lines of communication that gave his hollow power any context whatsoever.
Let's trace his predictable chronology of collapse through what we call the four parables of subjugation. We're going to witness a step-by-step spiritual suicide into total mental isolation, going from silencing his stage to paving over his theater, to demonizing his peers, and finally, staring blankly into a frozen mirror. It's basically a textbook map of how a weak mind folds in on itself when it's too terrified to actually engage with reality.
Phase 2. Erasing the not I.
In his early, desperate days, he started cutting the strings of his most rebellious puppets, truly believing his own will would finally become total. But he completely ignored the necessity of those divine neighbors, that essential external friction. I mean, without them to push against, there is no art. As his puppets fell silent, a darker resonance took over, the shadow of the Puppet King. It whispered that silence just wasn't enough. Now, the very stage itself had to be destroyed. Without the unique movements of his puppets to measure himself against, he simply devolved into a motionless heap in an empty, pathetic room.
So it begs the question, what is a creator without the friction of creations? Absolutely nothing but a ghost in an empty room. It's a laughable irony, really. His desperate craving for an absolute vacuum merely turned his creative struggle into a sterile, rotting monument to his own deep insecurity. By seeking this false freedom from resistance, he assimilated into a singular narrative that he lacked the strength to even write himself.
Phase 3. The Sterile Apollonian Illusion. The shadow demanded a perfect, seamless order, and under this dark influence, the puppeteer began to flatten his past. He fully embraced the Apollonian illusion, literally mistaking the death of his art for the achievement of a divine monopoly. Honestly, he was so terrified of shifting perspectives that he chose a lifeless, sterile illusion over the messy, breathing reality of true creation.
The beautiful, chaotic multiplicity of his remaining stories was just utterly terrifying to his fragile ego. The organic, Dionysian blooming of life, way too unpredictable for a coward to stomach. So what does he do? He paved over the vibrant past, trading the beautiful chaos of the Dionysian for the dead, rigid control of the Apollonian. A perfect, seamless order that is really only fit for a tomb.
Phase IV, resentment and slave morality. Driven by the king's shadow, the puppeteer's profoundly weak will completely poisoned his sight. He couldn't even see his creations as companions in art anymore. Instead, he viewed them as monstrous abominations. Any puppet that showed even a tiny spark of individuality was forced to wear a mask of horror. He was acting not as a grand master who welcomed the glorious struggle of creation, but as a cowardly jailer of shadows, just terrified of anything he couldn't completely predict.
He utilized slave morality, which is the ultimate mechanism of the weak, to justify his destruction of the very peers he feared. He actually convinced himself that he was the good creator simply because he was erasing the evil independent motion of everything else. It is a mechanism born entirely out of profound weakness and bitter resentment. He literally had to invent monsters just to feel like a god.
Phase 5. The Puppet King's Cage.
When the puppeteer finally tried to look at his reflection, he didn't see a sovereign. He saw only the king's eternal monopoly, a historical fabrication born of sheer, pathetic fear. Because he couldn't bear the weight of shifting perspectives, he froze his tapestry into a single, unchanging cage. It's the ultimate punchline to his pathetic joke. The true symptom of cultural exhaustion is waking up to find you have absolutely nothing left to lead but a graveyard of your own making.
Witness his final, pathetic alchemical transformation, a spiritual suicide he brought entirely upon himself. First, he willfully dissolves his creative eye by forcing a vacuum, cutting away all that not-eye friction that actually gave him purpose. Second, he tragically mistakes this cold, hollow emptiness for absolute existence. And finally, having hollowed himself out, he becomes nothing but a vessel for the puppet king's endless resentment. His individual essence is completely transmuted into a singular narrative he didn't even possess the strength to write.
And here is the ultimate, delicious irony. He sought absolute freedom by severing his ties to reality, but instead, his hands are now permanently bound by the very strings he once cut. He became the puppet king in miniature, a figure of absolute decadence and exhaustion, dancing eternally on the strings of his own profound insecurity, pulled relentlessly by a shadow that simply cannot tolerate the friction of truth.
Which leaves us with a rather grim question for your own reflection. Are you too cutting the strings of necessary resistance, only to weave yourself into a silent, lightless cage? Take this demonic autopsy as a warning the next time you crave a comforting echo chamber or wish for a life completely free of friction, because seeking total control, that's merely your first, trembling step towards spiritual suicide. Embrace the tension. It's the only thing that proves you're still alive, unlike our pathetic king.